Hello, you're watching Daybreak on A News. I'm Dilek Tuna. Let's take a look at the headlines. The US has carried out a 12th night of strikes on Iran as President Donald Trump renews his threat of further attacks. The United States and Saudi Arabia have signed a long-awaited civil nuclear agreement after years of negotiations. And ASEAN and regional powers gather in Manila as security challenges take centre stage. First this morning, an escalation in the US-Iran confrontation continues to threaten global energy supplies and key shipping routes. A 12th night of US military strikes on Iran, new warnings from both sides, and attacks on oil tankers are raising fears of a renewed regional conflict. Here's more.
The US Central Command says American forces launched a 12th consecutive night of strikes against Iran. CENTCOM says the operation targeted Iran's maritime capabilities, missile and drone storage facilities, coastal surveillance sites, and air defense systems. US President Donald Trump said Iran is not ready to make a deal. Speaking at a campaign rally in Marietta, Georgia, ahead of the 2026 US midterm elections, Trump said Tehran was getting hit hard.
And the stock market has said, and that's with this skirmish we have going on. I call it a skirmish. This is with this skirmish we have with the Islamic Republic of Iran, and I call it that because, let me tell you, they're getting hit so hard, and they want to make a deal. But I say they're not ready to make a deal, because every time they make a deal, they want to change it and everything. They're not ready. They'll be ready very soon.
He also renewed his threat to strike Iranian infrastructure, saying the United States would target a bridge or power plant every time Tehran attacks a ship in the Strait of Hormuz. Foreign Minister of Iran, Abbas Araghchi, said Iran's defense doctrine is eye for an eye. He warned that any aggression against Iran, including attacks on its infrastructure, would bring a powerful response, and that any country supporting such action would also be considered a legitimate target. Iran also said it carried out retaliatory drone strikes on US bases in Jordan and Bahrain, targeting troop facilities, equipment depots, and aircraft maintenance hangars. Early Thursday, the Iran-backed group the Houthis said they targeted 2 Saudi oil tankers, and maritime security reports said the Saudi flag tanker was hit in the Red Sea. Ship tracking data shows at least 7 oil tankers have reversed course near Yemen since the Houthis announced a maritime embargo on Saudi Arabia on Monday.
The European Union's latest sanctions package against Russia has hit another hurdle, with Greece emerging as the main obstacle to agreement over new restrictions on Russian liquefied natural gas. Anita Sharma has the details.
Welcome to This Day in Europe, where the EU once again struggles to keep a united front on sanctions against Russia. EU ambassadors met in Brussels in a fresh attempt to approve the bloc's 21st sanctions package, but Greece remains the main obstacle. The proposed measures are aimed squarely at Russia's financial sector, targeting more than 200 entities, including nearly 100 financial institutions, in an effort to further isolate Moscow's banking system and make it harder for Russia to finance its war in Ukraine. The package also includes new energy measures. From the start of next year, the EU plans to stop importing Russian liquefied natural gas and will prohibit European companies from providing services to Russian LNG terminals that are majority owned by Russian entities. But Athens is now pushing back against restrictions on Russian liquefied natural gas that it had already agreed to earlier this year. Greece, home to one of the world's largest LNG shipping industries, argues the measures would do little to reduce Russia's energy revenues while handing business to non-European competitors. One Greek shipping company that transports LNG from Russia's Yamal project has also warned the sanctions would hurt Western operators more than Moscow. The dispute highlights the growing difficulty of maintaining unanimous support for sanctions more than 4 years after Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Diplomats say the Commission is also proposing to keep the G7 price cap on Russian oil unchanged at $44.10 per barrel after concerns that raising the cap could actually increase Russian revenues. Now, the EU hopes to reach a compromise before ministers break for the summer, but negotiations show that while support for Ukraine remains strong, agreement on how to increase pressure on Russia is becoming increasingly difficult. For A News, I'm Anita Sharma in Arnhem, Netherlands.
Ukraine has launched fresh drone strikes overnight on 2 warehouses belonging to Russian online retailer Wildberries for the second time, extending attacks on a company central to Russia's consumer economy. Wildberries chief Tatiana Kim said the sites in Krasnodar and Nevinnytsk were targeted. Local officials in Krasnodar said 1 woman was killed and 3 others were injured. Meanwhile, Russia said it struck the Ukrainian port cities of Odessa and Chornomorsk, targeting port infrastructure, a cargo ship, a military storage facility, and fuel depots that Moscow says support Ukraine's armed forces. US Secretary of State Marco Rubio is expected to meet Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov on the sidelines of the ASEAN Foreign Ministers meeting in Manila. The 2 top diplomats are set to discuss the war in Ukraine, with Rubio saying the United States remains ready to play a constructive role in efforts to end the conflict. Lavrov welcomed the meeting, saying it's always better to ask questions directly and receive answers firsthand. The talks come amid ongoing diplomatic efforts to explore a path toward ending the war. And joining me now to discuss the latest on Russia-Ukraine is Dmitry Bridze, expert RIAC and political analyst from Moscow, Russia. Dmitry, welcome to Daybreak.
Good morning. Thank you for your invitation.
Now, EU ambassadors are attempting to finalise a 21st sanctions package targeting Russia's banking sector and financial networks, but Greece has raised objections over some energy-related measures. How do you assess these internal differences, and do they risk weakening the EU's collective message?
Of course, the discussion of European Union 21st sanction package shows that Brussels is continuing to the same strategy of economic pressure despite the limited political results of the previous 20 packages. And of course, it makes the negotiations about Ukraine between Russia and the European Union difficult because sanctions from the Russian perspective is a tool that making the negotiations more difficult. So the goal, of course, is to make Russia pay price because of the Ukrainian conflict. But from the Russian perspective, sanctions have not changed Moscow's strategic course. They have created additional costs, complicated financial transactions, and restricted access to certain technologies, but they have not forced Russia to abandon its security objectives. Instead, Moscow have accelerated economic adaptation, redirected trade toward Asia, the Middle East, Africa, and Latin America, and expanded alternative financial and logistical mechanisms. So, and of course, this mechanism doesn't mean that Russia is not facing economical pressure and economical problems, because also the Ukrainian drones that hits several factories and manufacturing inside Russia is also making for Russia more difficult to solve several economical problems in several regions.
Could Greece's objections delay the package significantly, Dmitry?
I think, of course, yeah, because some European countries, they see that these sanctions and these policies are not good for the European Union, and they are making the European Union facing more economical problems, because nowadays, without Russia, and Russia is a huge market, and in the past, before 2022, the Russian products were part of the European Union market. And nowadays, because of the Ukrainian crisis, the situation totally changed. Some countries, they see that these policies are not changing the Russian position and not doing anything in order to stop war in Ukraine. But some countries, they see as a pressure to make uh, the president of Russian Federation to change policies regarding Ukraine and to negotiate with Ukraine. But as we see, the result of sanctions is not good for European Union economy, and is making European Union facing several economical problems.
And Dmitry, another important development, Marco Rubio and Sergei Lavrov are expected to meet on the sidelines of the ASEAN meetings. Now, after years of confrontation, what practical value, if you like, would you say these diplomatic contacts still have?
In my opinion, I think it is very important, because now we see how the situation is becoming more dangerous between Russia and Ukraine. And today, Ukrainian drones hitting several regions in Russia, and it's making a big damage for Russian economy. So these negotiations could be first step in order to have a direct meeting between the Russian president and the Ukrainian president, and it could also solve problems that the U.S.-Russian relationship facing, because of course the U.S. President Donald Trump is more suitable for negotiations with the Russian president, but still there is there is a problem to have building trust between Russia and the US, because even though there is connection, there is possibility of working together, but still there is many problems facing the US-Russian relationship since 2022. It's related to sanctions, it's related to mistrust between countries, and of course it's related to the Ukrainian crisis. So today, Trump is trying to solve the situation of Ukraine, is trying to find a solution to end the war. But of course, the situation in the Middle East and the situation regarding the Iranian war, the U.S.-Iranian war, is making Trump administration more difficulties in order to solve the Ukrainian crisis, because they are more focused on the situation in the Middle East, in the Gulf region, and of course regarding the solving the situation with Iran.
Okay, so as you said, the relationship has been strained since 22. Do you see the Rubio-Lavrov meeting more as crisis management then, or could it become the starting point for broader discussions on Ukraine and the relationship between the two nations?
I think it could be only just a first step in order to have managing a meeting, a direct meeting between the US president and the Russian president before the elections in Russia and the United States of America, because in Russia we will have State Duma elections in September. In the US will be also elections in November. So both countries will have elections. So probably both leaders, they need to have a meeting, and also they need to have finding solution for the Ukrainian crisis, because I think that still Trump focusing on the situation in Iran and the situation facing the Gulf region. But it could be that after finding solution with Iran, that the U.S. Administration could focus more on Ukrainian crisis and trying to find a solution for the Ukrainian crisis. And it could be that before November, the Russian president could meet some delegations from Ukrainian side. But still, there is no any verification for this information. But I think that Russian side also understand very well that the situation is becoming more difficult inside Russia because of the economical pressure and because of the war. So it needs more negotiations, needs more diplomatic solution.
Dmitry, my final question to you. From Moscow's perspective, does another sanctions package materially alter Russia's strategic calculations, or has the Kremlin largely adapted to these successive rounds of restrictions?
The Russian position is that these sanctions are no longer merely a restriction to the conflicts in Ukraine. They are increasing viewed as part of a broader Western strategy of a long containment aimed at weakening Russian economically, technologically, and geopolitically. At the same time, the negotiations over the new package also reveal internal contradictions within the European Union. So what we see, the Russian position always saying that it's a Western policies that trying to making problems for Russia, but Russia also, we know that Russia is they. Russia learned how to skip the Western sanctions from 2020 for 2014 since the adoption of the sanctions. So, of course, now Russia building a network of relationship with Asian, Middle Eastern countries. So Russia sees these sanctions as a tool to make pressure, but also sees as a policy that could help the Russian economy to skip the sanctions and to find another way in order to trade with other countries.
Okay, Dimitri, thank you so much for joining Daybreak this morning. I appreciate your analysis.
Thank you.
We'll take a short break now. When we return, we'll continue with updates from around the world. Welcome back. You're watching Daybreak. Let's continue to look at global stories this hour. The United States and Saudi Arabia have signed a long-awaited civil nuclear agreement after years of negotiations. But it is already facing criticism from some lawmakers and nuclear experts over the risk of nuclear proliferation as it heads to Congress.
A long-awaited civil nuclear agreement between the United States and Saudi Arabia is now heading to Congress after being signed by senior officials from both countries. The pact allows the kingdom to build nuclear reactors using American technology, while also permitting Saudi Arabia to enrich uranium and reprocess nuclear waste, activities critics say are potential pathways to developing a nuclear weapon. US Secretary of Energy Chris Wright and Saudi Energy Minister Prince Abdulaziz bin Salman signed the agreement, known as a 1-2-3 agreement, alongside a bilateral safeguards accord. The US Energy Department says the deal complies with the non-proliferation requirements of the US Atomic Energy Act, describing them as among the world's strongest. However, unlike a proposal pursued during the Biden administration, the agreement does not include an additional protocol allowing the United Nations International Atomic Energy Agency to carry out intrusive snap inspections. The agreement now goes before Congress. Lawmakers have 90 session days to object, although overriding a presidential veto would require a 2/3 majority. Some nuclear experts and Democratic lawmakers are urging Congress to reject or amend the deal, warning it could increase the risk of nuclear proliferation in the Middle East. The agreement is expected to support the construction of AP1000 reactors over about 30 years in a project worth tens of billions of dollars, benefiting Westinghouse. An industry source says feasibility studies and the pace of nuclear development mean it could still take years before the necessary infrastructure is in place.
The UK's new Prime Minister Andy Burnham has unveiled another major policy announcement, promising to cap most bus fares in England at £2 from next year. That's just under $3. Zainab Farizadeh reports from Manchester.
Andy Burnham's third day as Prime Minister has brought another cost of living pledge, with the government announcing that most single bus fares in England will be capped at £2 from January next year. The government says the policy will cost more than £500 million, funded by relocating money from other departments, and insists it will place no additional burden on taxpayers. Here in Manchester, the announcement carries particular significance as Mayor Burnham introduced the B network, bringing buses back under local control for the first time since the 1980s. Greater Manchester already has a £2 fare cap, while the new national scheme targets areas where private operators still set fares.
So I think it will really help people with the cost of living pressures they're facing. It's there for the whole of 2027, and I think it will put money in people's pockets. The public's priority is reducing cost of living pressures, and that's what I'm doing. I'm taking a difficult look at some of the things that the government was committed to, digital ID being one example, and reprioritising.
The bus fare cap is the latest in a series of early policy announcements from Burnham's new government. On Tuesday, he pledged to remove VAT from household electricity bills for 6 months starting in October, describing his administration as a cost-of-living government. In his first speech as Prime Minister, Burnham also promised to end rough sleeping, build more council homes, and reform education to help more young people into work. Also, further details on those plans are still expected. Just 3 days into his premiership, attention is already turning to how the government will deliver on those promises in the months ahead. Zena Ferizadeh, A News, Manchester, United Kingdom.
Hungary's former Prime Minister Viktor Orban has accused the country's new government of undermining democracy as he calls on supporters to oppose what he describes as an abuse of power through peaceful means. Orban says Hungary has ceased to be a democratic state and is urging supporters to use all peaceful means to oppose the new government. His comments followed a raid on offices housing Fidesz servers as part of an investigation into alleged misappropriation at the National Culture Fund. Orban insists the raid was politically motivated and denies any wrongdoing, while prosecutors say it's linked to their criminal investigation. 9 months after a multi-million-dollar jewel theft exposed security weaknesses at the Louvre, France's most iconic gallery has reopened its doors.
Visitors are once again stepping inside the Louvre's Apollo Gallery, nearly 9 months after it closed following one of the museum's most audacious thefts. The gallery has reopened without the French crown jewels that were once its main attraction. Instead, visitors are being invited to rediscover one of the Louvre's most celebrated historic rooms and its richly decorated architecture. The crown jewels, including the famed Regent diamond, will eventually go on display in a dedicated high-security exhibition space elsewhere in the museum. Until then, work is continuing to prepare the new gallery. Outside the museum, visitors welcomed the reopening, while hoping lessons had been learned from last year's theft.
Well, it's surprising that it happened at all. I was shocked when I heard it happened. I don't know what they did over 9 months. Hopefully they increased security, but we'll see when we enter shortly.
Others said relocating the collection made sense if it meant better protecting some of France's most valuable treasures.
I think it is good that they have moved it because, I mean, if they put it back in the same place, then what's stopping them from coming back and getting it again? So.
The Apollo Gallery was closed after thieves used a mover's lift to reach a second-floor window, smashed display cases, and escaped with 8 pieces from the crown jewels collection in less than 7 minutes. Most of the stolen jewels remain missing, although a crown belonging to Empress Eugenie was later recovered damaged and is being restored. 4 people suspected of direct involvement in the robbery have been charged and placed in custody while the investigation continues.
Wildfires are spreading across parts of southern Europe, with firefighters continuing to battle blazes in France and Italy as hot, dry conditions and strong winds fuel the flames. In southwestern France near Bordeaux, around 600 people were evacuated to safety close to Lacanau. The fire has burned around 100 hectares, with officials warning of a high wildfire risk as heat and drought continue. In Italy, firefighters tackled several blazes in Sicily, where strong winds pushed flames toward homes. Authorities said a firefighter died after falling ill while responding to the flames. As diplomatic meetings continue in Manila for the third day, foreign ministers from ASEAN, China, Japan and South Korea met on Thursday for the 27th ASEAN Plus 3 foreign ministers meeting. They're focusing on regional cooperation, the Middle East conflict and security challenges.
Regional security and economic cooperation are top of the agenda at the 27th ASEAN Plus 3 Foreign Ministers meeting on Thursday in the Philippines. Top diplomats from Southeast Asia, China, Japan and South Korea gathered in Manila. South Korean Foreign Minister Cho Hyun reaffirmed Seoul's commitment to resuming dialogue with North Korea.
The Republic of Korea will continue to make every effort to achieve peaceful coexistence and shared prosperity on the Korean Peninsula by resuming dialogue with the DPRK.
Japanese Foreign Minister Toshimitsu Motegi stressed the importance of closer cooperation under the ASEAN Plus 3 framework. He said member countries should work together to address common challenges, including energy security, food security, aging populations and disaster resilience.
Japan, together with China as an ASEAN Plus 3 coordinator, will fully play its role in ensuring close coordination within ASEAN Plus 3 to advance and mainstream the ASEAN outlook on the Indo-Pacific. At the same time, I would like to reaffirm the importance of cooperation in addressing the common challenges facing all ASEAN Plus 3 countries.
China's Vice Foreign Minister Hua Chunying said growing global instability had made regional cooperation more important than ever.
As we meet here today, the world has entered a new period of turbulence and transformation. The situation in the Middle East has spilled over energy and food supply chains, and security and resilience have been disrupted. Traditional and emerging security challenges are intertwined complicatedly. The call for regional countries to jointly address challenges has grown stronger.
The meeting comes as concerns grow over the war in Iran and the risk of disruption to shipping through the Strait of Hormuz and Red Sea. For Southeast Asia, which relies heavily on Middle Eastern oil, prolonged instability could further strain energy supplies and fuel inflation across the region.
Over to Gaza, where Hamas' newly elected leader is calling for renewed momentum in efforts to end the war in the Strip, urging mediators to advance negotiations while proposing broader political talks involving all Palestinians. The group's leader, Khalil al-Hayya, urges mediators to press for a transition to the second phase of US President Donald Trump's Gaza peace plan. In a televised address, he called for a national dialogue, including all Palestinians and full political partnership. Hayya was named Hamas leader on Monday, but talks involving the group, mediators and Trump's envoys have so far failed to reach a broader agreement to end the conflict.
Our first and clear priority is a complete cessation of the occupation's aggression, killing and terrorizing, and the achievement of a full withdrawal from the Gaza Strip. We're here, calling on the countries sponsoring the negotiation process to exert real pressure on the extremist right-wing occupation government to implement what has been agreed upon and to proceed with the transition to the next phase.
The US House of Representatives has narrowly approved a record $1.15 trillion defense policy bill, highlighting deep divisions in Washington over military spending. Republicans say the funding is needed to support US operations, including the war in Iran, strengthen defense capabilities, and improve pay and housing for service members. Democrats, however, argue the bill comes at a time when social programs are facing spending cuts and have also raised concerns about the conflict with Iran and a provision to deepen Pentagon ties with Israel. Brazil has condemned new US tariffs on selected exports as groundless, with officials saying they are ready to protect domestic businesses and jobs from the impact.
Selected Brazilian exports are facing new 25% US tariffs, although products including coffee, beef and oranges have been exempted. The US Trade Representative's office announced the measures on July 15th, targeting selected Brazilian goods while exempting products the United States does not produce or that could affect supply chains.
This time it was more selective. For example, US hamburger production relies heavily on Brazilian beef. To avoid higher prices, beef was exempted. The same goes for coffee and pig iron. To avoid raising their costs, anything that matters to US consumers was exempted.
Brazil's government says it has prepared measures to protect domestic businesses and jobs. It estimates around 18% of its exports to the United States, worth about $7 billion, will be affected. Back says the tariffs are driven more by politics than economics, pointing to Washington's investigation into Brazil's PIX payment system and what he describes as pressure linked to Visa and MasterCard and Silicon Valley.
An Austrian athlete has completed what is being described as a world-first stunt, combining 3 extreme sports disciplines in a single airborne feat. Elias Schwartzler rode his trail bike on top of a hot air balloon in flight at an altitude of 950 metres before jumping off, launching into a double front flip and landing safely under parachute. The stunt is considered the first of its kind in the world, uniting mountain biking, ballooning and base jumping. Schwartzler also set a bicycle speed world record of 272 kilometres per hour on Wednesday. We'll take a short break now. When we return, we'll discuss key regional stories. Stay with us. Welcome back to Daybreak. Let's continue with stories from the region. United Nations Secretary-General Antonio Guterres is expected to visit Syria this week in what will be the first visit by a serving UN chief since 2009. Now, during the visit, he is due to meet President Ahmed al-Shara, Foreign Minister Assad al-Shaibani and representatives of Syrian civil society, whilst also visiting the UN Disengagement Observer Force along the Syrian-Israeli separation area. The visit comes as Damascus continues efforts to consolidate state authority following the collapse of the Assad government, with the United States reaffirming its support for Syria's sovereignty and territorial integrity. It also takes place amidst growing strategic competition between Turkey and Israel over the future security architecture of post-Assad Syria. Now, against the backdrop, the visit is widely seen as another important step in the international legitimisation of Syria's new leadership. Joining me now to discuss is Kazim Kazimov, a journalist and political analyst joining us from Baku, Azerbaijan. Kazim, welcome to the program.
Good morning. Thank you for the invitation.
Now, this is, as we said in our intro there, this is the first visit to Syria by a serving United Nations Secretary-General since 2009. To what extent does Antonio Guterres' presence in Damascus represent a further legitimisation of President Ahmed al-Shara's administration?
Well, we know 15 years ago in Syria started a civil war, and after maybe 10 years, it was the revolution in Syria. And today in Syria, the situation is so hard. And I think the visit of Guterres to Syria is a historical moment for the Sham, because Syria needs a lot of help. First problem of Syria is food, because Syrian peoples over 50% can't find safety product, and also water. Safe water is problem in Syria, and also third problem is education. Maybe Guterres and Ahmed al-Shara discuss about these problems.
Now, aside from those problems, you mentioned territorial control and functioning statehood are not necessarily the same thing. In which particular areas, constitutional development, public administration, security sector reform, refugee returns, or reconstruction? Now, could the United Nations make its most meaningful contribution to Syria's transition?
And also Syria has territorial problems because the minorities, yes, in Syria, first Druze, second Kurdish people live in Syria, but they want autonomy. And also Sham, Ahmed al-Shara, and Foreign Minister of Syria say, we don't want to give authority for Druze and Kurdish groups because if one of them they give authority, other groups also want authority. But United Nations and other countries say that maybe Syria can give authority to minority groups, but it's problem for Ahmed al-Shara and his ministers. Maybe they discuss about it, and also we know some countries impose sanctions for Syria, and they about discuss the sanctions, and also Syria has some problems with regional countries, Israel, Iran, Lebanon, and other countries, and also Syria has maybe a lot of opportunities because they transition we can say they have power, but uses roads and transition roads uses today. If United Nations help to Syria, it will be good for Syria.
Okay. And Kazım, Turkey and Israel pursued separate but in some respects concurrent military and strategic courses that contributed to the weakening of the Assad regime order before December 2024. Now, why have these interests diverged so sharply since then, and what precisely are Ankara and Israel now competing over in Syria?
Ankara and Israel has problems because we can say the competition in Middle East because Ankara say that Israel bombing Syria and they took over Golan Heights, and it's problem for Syria and for Turkey. And Israel say if Turkey don't support the groups, maybe they was group. Today they are government in Syria. Turkey don't. If Turkey don't support the government of Syria, it's not problem for us. But Turkey said, if we don't support the Syrian government, in Syria will start crisis. We start crisis, and it's problem for Ankara. We know in Turkey live over 5 million Syrians, and Ankara wants they come back to Syria. And maybe Antonio Guterres can help for this situation if Syria, Ankara, and Israel can start peace talks. It will be good for a region.
And Washington supports Syria's territorial integrity, regards Turkey as an indispensable NATO ally, and remains Israel's principal security partner. So how's the United States attempting to reconcile these competing relationships? And is its objective merely to prevent an accidental Turkey-Israel confrontation?
Of course, we can say Washington support regional integrity of Syria because we remember in Iraq, yes, problem many years ago, Kurd groups, Sunni groups, and Shia groups. And Iraq, when in Iraq start crisis, after the crisis, we see a terrorist group ISIS. The regional countries and also USA think that if in Syria they can't make regional integrity, in Syria start again the some war, and the minority groups also they will be bad situation for these groups. And maybe Israel and United States discuss about it, and USA maybe say to Israel, we also support the regional integrity of Syria. It's important for safety for Syria, safety for Turkey, and safety for regional countries.
Kazım, thank you so much for joining us on Daybreak this morning. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you again. Have a good day.
A wildfire in southwest Turkey has destroyed homes and forced evacuations, with firefighters continuing a major operation to contain the blaze in a mountainous area. 2 houses burned and 80 people were evacuated to safety as the flames approached homes in the sparsely populated Fethiye district. AFAD says 14 helicopters, 5 planes, 53 fire trucks and 380 personnel worked to contain the blaze. The fire broke out around noon on Wednesday, with helicopters battling the flames from the air and firefighters continuing efforts on the ground into the evening. Kazakhstan's oil exports are facing fresh uncertainty after the Caspian Pipeline Consortium reportedly stopped accepting crude. Reports from Reuters say the move follows a series of drone attacks near the consortium's marine terminal. Fariza Kalimurzina reports from Almaty.
The Caspian Pipeline Consortium, which handles around 80% of Kazakhstan's oil exports, has stopped accepting crude after a series of drone attacks near its marine terminal in Novorossiysk, according to Reuters. The news agency, citing 3 industry sources, says the decision follows repeated attacks on oil tankers operating near the terminal. 5 vessels have reportedly been targeted in the area since the beginning of July, raising concerns over the security of maritime operations. And according to Bloomberg, the disruption is not the result of damage to the pipeline itself. Instead, tankers are staying away from the terminal because of the security risks, leaving exports temporarily at a standstill. The situation is being closely watched by Chevron, which owns a 15% stake in the consortium. Kazakhstan's foreign and energy ministries have condemned the attacks, calling them strikes against international energy infrastructure. Ukraine's ambassador to Kazakhstan, Viktor Maiko, said that drone attacks on tankers carrying Kazakh oil do not serve Ukraine's interests. And as uncertainty over the country's main export route continues, Kazakhstan is accelerating plans to expand domestic refining. The government is increasing the capacity of its 3 existing refineries and is also starting the construction of a new refinery capable of processing up to 10 million tons of crude a year. Fariza Kalimurzina, Almaty, A News.
And now a centuries-old culinary tradition shared by Azerbaijan and Turkey is seeking global recognition. The 2 countries have jointly applied to UNESCO to add the art of making baklava to its intangible cultural heritage list. Here's more.
Azerbaijan and Turkey have jointly applied to UNESCO to recognize the traditional art of making baklava as part of the world's intangible cultural heritage. The nomination, titled The Art of Making Baklava and Its Cultural Practices, highlights the shared cultural roots, rich heritage, and close ties between Azerbaijan and Turkey. The application presents the dessert under both the names baklava and paklava, describing it as a shared culinary tradition between the 2 countries. A final decision is expected during UNESCO's 21st session, which will take place in Xiamen, China, from November 30th to December 5th. For generations, the art of making baklava has been passed down from one generation to the next in both Azerbaijan and Turkey. More than just a dessert, baklava is an important part of Nowruz celebrations, religious holidays, family gatherings, and other special occasions. It reflects hospitality, creativity, and the tradition of bringing people together. In Azerbaijan, several regional varieties are well known, including those from Baku, Ganja, Guba, and Sheki baklava. Joint nominations like this are common under UNESCO's 2003 Convention for the Safeguarding of the Intangible Cultural Heritage. When the same cultural tradition exists in more than one country, UNESCO encourages countries to submit a shared nomination. If approved, UNESCO will recognize and help safeguard the traditional knowledge, skills, and cultural practices associated with making baklava as part of the world's living heritage.
And that brings us to the end of Daybreak. Stay tuned to A News for more world news throughout the day.